So hello, this is Talking Timber podcast with me, Mike Jeffrey.
And me, Keith Fryer.
And today on our podcast, we've got one of the stalwarts, I shall say, of the UK timber industry, Geoff Rhodes.
A pioneer as well.
A pioneer of MDF. Geoff has been in the timber industry for
a long time.
Yeah. And has had a very interesting career. But he was actually instrumental, as we said, a pioneer of introducing MDF from the USA to the UK and European markets. And it's now, from those early days, it's now just such a ubiquitous product.
What's that saying you always give? We're only so many feet from a piece of MDF.
Yes, 10 feet from a piece of MDF.
Yeah. But it's true. And I've been really looking forward to getting this recording, should we say, in the bag, because we've all known Geoff a long time.
Yes.
And I mean, what he did back then was remarkable.
Yeah.
And I just want to sort of get this one down for posterity as well.
Definitely.
It's a massive story.
Yeah, and also a key figure in the wider timber industry, you know, active in industry associations and, you know, speaking out on key topics. So,
We better get him in.
Yeah.
Are you there, Geoff?
Yes, I am. Hello, morning, guys.
Hello, morning,
Geoff.
So,
fantastic.
Look
At
forward
least
to
he's
playing
there.
my part in this history. Yeah.
Reminiscing,
Let's start with a little bit of the background first, Geoff. You know, we had Seaboard and involvement with trade associations and everything. So if you could give us a brief synopsis, that would be great before we get on to MDF.
Yeah, because you started out working for various timber companies before you came to Seaboard. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, indeed. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yes, it is. I mean, I entered the timber trade actually in the days when we used to have management trainees that were organised through the timber industry and furniture industry training boards when there was a levy system. And I entered the trade in 1969, so it's quite a long time ago. When, in those days, all the big importers. All the big importers had lots of trainees, which were basically on a 3-year training program, which was linked to working in the industry. You could call it a sandwich course, and then linked to colleges around the UK. I was involved at High Wycombe, which is actually one of the timber technology colleges that was mainly focused on the furniture industry because of the big furniture manufacturing in that part of the world in those days. And High Wycombe was great. So I had 3 years there. Then I entered really the commercial world with the company that was called Denny Mott and Dixon. That was a traditional timber industry company, big importer. And then in the way that the industry changed with mergers and acquisitions, that became part of the group which was known as Mallance and Denny. And that's a company some of your listeners will remember from way back.
And as an ex-employee myself of Mallance and Denny, I know.
And that's it. So one of the good sort of stalwarts of the industry, and that was sort of how the trade was back in those days into the early 1970s. But of course, these were the importing companies, and all the importers by the name, you know, they relied on overseas supply to feed the importing network. So in fact, I transitioned in 1975 to work for one of the largest Canadian suppliers to the UK market, a company called Seaboard International.
Yeah.
We're headquartered in Vancouver in Canada, offices all around the world, a big exporter of Canadian wood and other wood products for North America. And I was there within the sales department of the London-based Seaboard offices in British Columbia House, which was in central London. Very interesting time, you know, bulk carriers coming from that part of the world all around the world carrying huge quantities of Canadian wood. And actually it was at that time then that the Canadians were also developing what they regarded as specialty products. You had the bulk timber and plywood activities, but actually as a small niche part of their business was actually added value individual specialities. And in fact, that's where the MDF products started to come into the story.
What year do you think MDF first kicked off, Geoff?
Well, actually, the company that we represented was a company called Medford Corporation, who are down in Medford in Oregon, just about 50 miles north of the Californian border. They started producing MDF in the early part of 1975.
Right.
But MDF actually was created in the US as a bit of an experiment, as a bit of an accident, a way of messing around with dry fiber and messing around with resins. And you'll remember back in the day, you know, wet process hardboard existed and still exists today, but that used water as the vehicle of transport and And basically, by squeezing the water out of the fibre, you ended up with a bond. But with MDF, it was not a wet process. It was a dry fibre. And then using Swedish technology, really from the pulp and paper industry, to create that fibre, messing around with resins, looking at adhesives, looking at pressing techniques, actually is how MDF emerged. So that was actually the tail end of the 1960s. But Medite was the brand name for the product that Medford Corporation produced. They, as a company, were looking for interesting, different added value, new, fresh materials
and so
to use in Oregon.
They are the first manufacturer of MDF in the world.
I couldn't say they were the first, but they were in a small subgroup of 4 or 5 companies that took that technology and decided to run with it. I'm going to put in a round robin, if you like, that are the companies that were at the same time going down that same sort of journey. There was one in New Zealand who went under the brand name of Custom Wood.
I thought there was.
Which some of your listeners may remember that name. There was a small operation in actually the former Yugoslavia called Mediapan, and there was also subsequently a small operation in the Mediterranean coast of Spain with a company called Intermarsa.
Yes.
But Medford Corporation in the US was probably the first company of scale, and they produced they developed a manufacturing facility producing about 140,000 cubic meters of MDF for the North American market. And by North American, I would include then Canada in that market space. And it was that link into Canada. I can go back to the name Seaboard and the company I was working for. Seaboard was actually a cooperative of about 35 different Canadian companies, all looking to export products internationally. Seaboard was the let's say the coordinator of all of those supply lines, and one of those companies was a company in Vancouver also called Weldwood of Canada. Weldwood became the Medite distributor across Canada, and through Weldwood, Seaboard then had access to considering, is this a possibility to look for exports into Europe and elsewhere? And it was through that actually it started with us in London.
And what's the thinking behind MDF, medium density fibreboard? Was that essentially to use byproduct from the timber industry? Was that
a combination? Yeah, because basically, many wood processing operations, whether they be sawmills, plywood mills, hardwood mills, whatever, would have residual materials which actually maybe could go typically into particle board. But this actually became a more added value, technically refined product. And so in a way, Mike, yes, not always using byproducts, but could often be, forest thinnings, in the forestry program, taking out some of the roundwood that was smaller, that wasn't going to be for sawmills, but actually then using the defibration process, breaking it back into fibre that might otherwise go into the pulp and paper industry, but now could actually similarly go into the fibreboard MDF industry. And that was really giving other options that didn't exist before.
So which way round was it? Was it you in the UK who said to Seaboard, you got this product, can we have a go at investing and setting up something over this side of the pond? Or did the Seaboard Canada side say to you, guys, you need to get on board with this? How about setting up a plant? Which way round was it?
Yeah, for the record, it's quite an interesting evolution. So Seaboard, put it into perspective. So Seaboard was the sales agent for Medford Corporation, and we started in 1976. And in fact, I personally can remember the first 2 orders all those years ago. 1 pack of 18mm 8x4 for Phoenix Timber, a name that doesn't exist anymore. But I can remember the very first order was with actually a guy called Ian Milne, Phoenix Timber, 1 pack of 18mm MDF, born out of a sample that we'd sent from the US to say, what do you think of this? And it was like, it looks pretty interesting. It's probably a bit expensive, but we'll have a pack of it.
Didn't they have a place at Frog Island?
Yeah, at Raynham. At Raynham.
That's right.
And the second order that came on the same ship was actually with Keys of Vanessa. Keys of Vanessa was a company that became part of Mayer International.
That's right.
And Keys of Vanessa at Twickenham, they had a buyer there called Barry Bramwell. Barry also gave us a pack of 18mm before. So I'm going to just set the scene that Seaboard had these huge bulk carriers bringing up to 30,000 tons.
With a couple of packs of MDF.
Exactly. 30,000 tons of pulp, paper, lumber, plywood, and somewhere buried within that 30,000 ton cargo were 2 packs of Medite MDF, one for Keys and Nest and one for Phoenix.
Amazing.
So
that's actually where it started.
What were the end uses that you initially sort of were targeting?
Okay, so I mean, of course, this was all a big adventure at the time, and nobody really had any idea where this would go, other than the fact here was a product that looked incredibly interesting, a smooth surfaced, quite homogeneous in its thickness, the ability to machine that profile onto the edges, machine through the face. It was something really rather unique that the industry hadn't seen before. And I can remember the initial samples that came from Medford, which they used, which are like miniature pieces of like a kitchen cabinet door that showed a cutout for a hinge block in the back of it, and a profiled edge on the front of it, showing what you could do with this material without edge lipping it, without putting solid wood onto it. And actually what started to go back to your question, I remember one of the first companies that actually embraced it were making bedroom furniture, sort of kidney-shaped dressing kidney-shaped dressing tables, spray painted in white, which before had been particle board edge lipped to allow the machining. Suddenly here was a material that you could actually take in a slab form as a sheet, cut it to shape, put a profile edge on it, and actually then put a really good paint surface around the edge. And it transformed actually how maybe manufacturing into furniture could be considered, removing edge lipping and that sort of thing. So that was sort of one of the first areas. And reproduction furniture of all sorts, shapes and styles, which was very popular in the 1970s, 1980s, maybe with mahogany, yew, exotic veneers, but always typically on particle board and edge lipped with a hardwood edging to actually hide the edge. But I remember one of the campaigns we had with Medite, it was Medite has the edge in MDF, and it was exactly that actually you could now start to machine this panel product and you didn't have to hide it. You could actually work with it.
How big was the North American market for it already before we came to the
again, I mean, they were probably in truth, so we started in the late 1976. The mill had opened in Medford in I think late 1974, early 95. So they were about 18 months ahead of us, and the market was actually growing well. But of course, they also were looking for export markets, hence my comment about opening up Canada, and then through Canada looking at elsewhere. But the market was growing and growing steadily. And in fact, it was the same when eventually there was a mill that we built in Ireland that we come on to. You start the production, and in fact these lines are designed to run 24/7. That's the engineering that's required. So you're producing product, it's got to go somewhere. So whether it was in North America, whether it was in Canada, whether it was export, the dynamics were always there. The volume was going to be being produced, and it's got to go somewhere, and then the market becomes more refined.
So here we are then. You're because I'm thinking of the time now. We've got so much we want to pack into this. You're going into Europe. So how did it happen?
Okay. How soon did you know you was onto something big? I'll shortchange it. So we then indexed forward to 1980. So 1976, 76, 77, 78, 79. That was slowly building, and in the UK by sort of into 1980, we were probably exporting about 10,000 cubic meters from Medford, Oregon through Seaboard to UK and Europe. So, significant, but relatively small. Here's a mill producing 140,000 cubic meters, but we were about 10,000 cubic meters of that. So significant, building up a loyal customer base, a good distribution base. But I remember actually, there was a doyen of the industry, and you're absolutely correct to mention him in this conversation. If you like, Mr. MDF, as far as I was concerned, was a great American guy called Ted Bauer. Ted was the sales director at Medford Corporation. He was an absolute joy to work with, laid back, North American, brought his experience to the market. And I remember on a visit that Ted and I had in the UK, we were visiting one or two furniture manufacturers. This was in 1980. And we were actually at the point where, we could sell a lot more. And it was actually almost a case of allocation, who could have what out of this 10,000 cubic meters. I remember taking Ted back to Heathrow Airport. We'd driven back from Bristol. We're driving up the M4. And I was sort of saying, we've just got to get some more supply, because actually this is really limiting what we can do. But the demand and the interest is there. I remember Ted saying, as I dropped him at Heathrow, said, Geoff,
all I can say, I can't say much, but can I just say, stop worrying about it?
Excellent.
So that left me sort of quizzically thinking, well, that's a really strange thing to be saying, because in fact, what became then a very big project was shrouded in mystery at that time. But actually, within about a month, there was then an announcement that Medford Corporation had decided to build a European plant. It was going to be in the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah.
It was going to be a mirror image of the Medford plant in Oregon. It was going to be 140,000 cubic meters. It was going to be a $50 million investment in 1980.
That's a lot of money.
And that's a lot of money. And others can do the maths of what $50 million in 1980 was today's equivalent. But I still remember Ted saying to me, Geoff, stop worrying about it. Because actually there was 4 weeks later, it's like, there's 140,000 cubic meters. We're worried about 10,000.
And $50 million as well. Yeah. So what was the logic of choosing the site in Ireland?
So in fairness, two things. I think the Irish Forestry Authority had been planting timber, such as we were in the UK actually after the Second World War, quite a programme of planting, and Ireland was certainly trying to move its economy from a rather agricultural economy into more an industrial economy. So the Industrial Development Board, IDA, in Ireland was certainly going around the world looking for inward investment of all sorts of industries to be attracted to Ireland. And in fact, this wood supply part of that equation was something that actually caught Medford Corporation's attention. And again, to cut a long story short, the interest of the Irish to get inward investment for industry, Medford's recognition that actually internationally this product was really going to go somewhere, and the fact there was a foothold in the European market led to, in the end, a decision to use that Irish raw material and go for that site. I mean, it could have been elsewhere, but actually there were enough components that made it interesting. So the raw material actually was good as well. The Sitka spruce that was there was good.
So that was 1980. Let's whiz forward. When did the plant open?
Okay, so we had a reception in London in 1980, announcing that. It was a big reception held in London that Seaboard organised. We brought all the trade together, but it was a 3-year construction programme. So actually the plant opened in 1983, and the first boards were produced in September of that year.
Because I can remember meeting you at Stanton's in 1983/4, just as the plant was about to kick off, and Chris Coles was my boss. Do you remember Chris Coles?
Yes, I do remember Chris.
And, I do. And you came in with these samples of this MDF from that plant, and we were going like, wow. This is really...
I think I've seen a picture of that, and people had more hair, didn't they?
Yeah, a lot. but it was a fascinating time, because...
it really was.
Yeah, we were very small players in sheet materials there. Stanton's was a big softwood company, but we could see the opportunity, and anyway, come on, you tell us how it went.
I think what was really fascinating, I think what really it got everybody enthusiastic, not only myself but many others, was this was actually generically something completely different. We've got plywood, we've got blockboard, we've had wafer boards, we've got particle board, we've got hardboard, and actually now generically for the timber industry, we have something now additionally completely different that stands alone in its own way. It's a material in its own right. And I remember saying to Ted Power, to go back to him for a second, and we used to have great conversations about this and the North American market and how they were ahead of us. What could we learn from what they knew, and what markets could we explore that they had explored successfully? I said, actually, what? Medium density fibreboard, it's all a bit of a mouthful, Ted. When people say, well, what does MDF mean? And he'd say to me, Geoff, there's only one thing you need to remember. It's MDF stands for mighty damn fine.
Yep. So here we are. You're up, you're running. How did the market react?
Okay, so in fairness, as I said earlier, you've got
a lot to shift there, haven't you?
A lot to shift. Yeah, 140,000 cubic meters.
24/7 production.
24/7. So in fairness, it's so fascinating. You've got all the forestry to organise. In Ireland, I can remember actually the then president of Medford Corporation, just in that build-up to the start-up, was a guy called Bob Higgins. Bob came over to Ireland. We've got some great photographs. Irish forestry was sort of coming out of the dark ages into sort of modernising what it was doing. We've got photographs of horses dragging logs out of the forest in Ireland. And this is Ireland's forestry transportation system, and Bob Higgins standing there shaking his head for a minute thinking, actually, we're going to have to try and sort of ramp this up a bit, you know. But, you know, this is all part of it. I go back to that word pioneering that Mike mentioned. And this was the fun of it, because actually this was all about making something new happen. And so it was the forestry, it was the replanting, it was the analysis of the raw material. The Sitka spruce was the main predominant species. In fact, when the decision to go into Ireland was made, some container loads of spruce were sent from Ireland to the US.
Right, to do testing.
Made into board, see what it was like.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was fine. It was absolutely fine. So that again led to the confidence, say, this is actually a go situation, let's do it. And but it was an adventure. I mean, and I'm not sure today that sort of with all the checks and balances that are made today on any investment decision, you know, this was far, far, far more of a spirited decision, an adventure, and a self-belief that this was actually going to work. But, you know, I think today that maybe might not have happened in the same way, but it happened then. And it was very, very creative and real pioneering stuff.
And MDF hasn't stood still since then, has it? I mean, there've been a huge array of technical developments. I mean, how soon did those kind of start? And what,
no, it's a good point, Mike. No, absolutely. Because so I touched on the sort of reproduction furniture, the white painted furniture, machining the edge, that sort of thing. But actually, with resin technology and different markets to look at, because again, you know, the volume was significant. Actually, construction sector, the whole building sector was another whole part of the market outside of furniture. So actually, if you then look at what the particle board industry had done over many, many years, you could get moisture resistant particle board. Why couldn't we have moisture resistant MDF? So actually then using melamine reinforced resins, actually moisture resistant MDF evolved. And then what that allowed us to do, which was really interesting, it's still a significant part of the market today, was to actually look at the solid wood, softwood molding sectors where, for instance, where moisture might be an issue. And particularly, my mind goes back to thinking about the window boards.
Window board.
Sills,
I was going to say that.
Got in old language, sort of 9 or 10 inch wide window boards, where maybe it might have been Piranha pine, it might have been high quality Scandinavian wide widths. Sometimes availability of that material was quite difficult and expensive. Well, actually, with an MDF, moisture resistant, able to resist any condensation coming down windows, as is typically the case. You know, you could cut that width to any width you want, put a ball nose front edge on it, the rebate into the window frame at the back, and hey presto, you've got a beautiful, solid, smooth window board that could be primed, painted, and actually that transformed over time. The thinking that actually MDF now was maybe going to be an alternative to some wide widths of timber, and then you got into moldings for architrave skirting, and particularly in those early days, wide widths when you were doing, you know, deep skirting boards in old Victorian houses, where again the availability of that wide width timber was difficult.
And the stability of it. Yeah. So
that sort of got us into the building and construction sector slowly at first, but gradually it multiplied to the point where not only typical timber importing companies who had their own manufacturing molding lines could use this, but actually then it led to the evolution of new companies coming into the market saying, actually, we're going to be an MDF molding manufacturer. And there was a number of them then, and they still exist today.
And then we move on briefly, if we could, to things like exterior MDF. There's been other developments, haven't there, of product? Yeah,
again, I think the whole ethos with the Medite brand, and I mean, of course, down this journey, I'm going to just put into the history. Other companies came into the international market across Europe and elsewhere. But, you know, the trend with our Medite brand and what I was involved in was how can we keep extending the market opportunities? How can we keep adding value? So, yes, looking at, you'd come from the moisture resistant story I've just described to then say, well, actually, what about the exterior market? Is there some scope? And that was always going to be challenging because, you know, wood and water, you know, they react together and eventually, you know, you get expansion and this sort of thing. So again, working with resin companies and resin technology, that was again a Medford, Oregon initiative that they created a brand new product which is really unique worldwide called MedX, which was effectively exterior Medite. That was using an isocyanate resin, completely different resin system And actually that again started to open up things like, I can remember, things like, let's from memory say, like signage outside of places like pubs and restaurants.
I was going to say pubs and
so sign writing and like what are the benefits we're looking for? Well, we're looking for something that's a smooth surface that can be well painted, that's not going to crack and split, and that sort of thing starts to get MDF into the mind of designers and users. Say, well, maybe we can take MDF outside. I'm going to say this was a first generation product. It was labelled with all sorts of cautionary things saying you must seal the edge, maybe you've got to close the edge, you've got to maintain it, you've got to look after it. It's not a piece of steel, it's not a piece of plastic, it's a piece of wood, but it's actually got its integrity, but you're going to need to take care of it. So that was sort of like the first generation, but again, it allowed the horizons for where was MDF going. It was going into a broader and broader and different marketplace. And the more that happened, then of course, gradually, the bigger the market became, the more aware people became across all sorts of markets.
So roughly speaking, again, I'm looking at this clock. Where are we today? So if you had that 140,000 cubic meters at Clonmel or Ireland, across Europe today, roughly speaking, what's the capacity? Yeah.
Okay.
In Europe.
Again, just for your audience, I still maintain an interest in this industry.
Yes.
I do work as a journalist. I'm still doing a global MDF overview for Wood-Based Panels International, and that just keeps me sort of on board with some of these numbers. So it is quite remarkable. I'm just looking now. The last article published said actually going out to 2025, 2026, now you're going to hold your breath here.
Yeah.
The global capacity of MDF is 136 million and 33,000 cubic meters. So, and in Europe, it's 32 million 389. So if you're talking about the pioneering and the one pack
Incredible.
of MDF for Keys Van Ester and Phoenix Timber, this is a global success story. And again, for almost all the principal reasons I've mentioned of a new generic material that can be used for all sorts of different things with added value and techniques applied to it, that's just continued to grow in that way. We haven't mentioned high density products, we haven't mentioned fire rated products, but they're all in the mix. Laminate flooring, so on and so forth. It's a very wide market,
and it's a global product and a global, as you said, a global market for MDF now.
China's the biggest, is it? I guess.
China
making a guess.
Is very big. Yeah, China, out of that 136 million, China has 58 million cubic meters, which is vast.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
No, it's big.
And we've also got to talk about. Product safety has been a big focus, hasn't it? Working with MDF. Formaldehyde emissions. The latest EU formaldehyde regulations are going to be applied by, I think, August this year. How is the industry? How has the MDF industry sort of tackled that?
Yeah, I think the industry's done well, actually. Again, it's a moving feast. In the early days, and we're talking a long time ago now, sort of 50 years ago, 1976. The resin adhesive systems are exactly the same sort of systems that are used in producing plywood, blockboard, particle board, many other products. So formaldehyde's a word that gets bandied about. It's a reality. It's a chemical. It's used in adhesive systems. Gradually over the years, reducing the levels of chemicals in many, many, many things has been the trend. And the industry has worked really hard with the resin industry and in fact adapted and met the necessary standards that have been sort of prerequisites of entering different markets. So I think if you go back in the early days, the levels of adhesives and formaldehyde, free formaldehyde in those products was much, much higher than it is today.
Yes.
But actually that's the trend across many, many, many industries. And really, I think the industry can be proud that it's really moved with the times. And the resin industry itself has continued to use technologies to improve the characteristics and performances in a safe way for industries like our wood-based panels industry to use. And
so
in that space.
If we go back, pre-1983, to me as a salesman, blockboard was the product that you sold as a panel for joinery sort of application.
Yes.
Today, the manufacture of blockboard, does it even still exist? MDF literally wiped it out, didn't it?
Yeah, I think blockboard was a great product, no doubt about it. I think particularly the plywood companies that would would often use the small peeler log
Yep.
that was left and the lathe and the peeling process. They would then cut that into small blocks, and I think it was a really good way of using that material into a panel product. I think there are still a few small producers of blockboard. It's certainly not a mainstream product today.
It just shows, doesn't it?
Many of the uses that blockboard would have been used for before, MDF has been a really adequate substitute for that, and perhaps has even brought other benefits.
Yeah, I mention it purely because when I talk to some of the younger people now working alongside me, and they go, what do you mean blockboard? What? Yeah, exactly. It's and MDF moldings now are just generic. They are the majority of what companies sell into the market compared to softwood, whereas 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was totally the other way around. It's an extraordinary journey.
It is.
And crystal ball time. Sorry.
Just wanted to mention, actually, because you talked about Seaboard and that evolution from Medite, what I would just say is Seaboard remained the sales agent for the Irish operation up until end of 1986. So 3 years beyond the start of the Irish mill, even though I was talking about the logistics of bringing products to North America. So Seaboard helped coordinate, and I was very involved in the whole logistical realities of getting products now from Ireland to the European and UK market as against coming from Vancouver.
Yeah.
So that was a big part. The guys in Clonmel, Ireland were absolutely focused on manufacturing the product. There were other people like ourselves in London and elsewhere. We had offices in Europe actually working on the logistics and distribution of the product. So then we got to the end of 1986, and then I actually personally transferred from Seaboard International, and we set up a Medite Europe operation in the UK, and there were operations in Europe as well. So just an important part of the history. That was from 1986. And then it moved into, we stood on our own as Medite in this market, which actually helped in the branding. It was clearer that we were on our own, and we left in good faith with Seaboard. They'd had a 10-year run at it, but they were the agents, and then we stood on our own, which is the way actually many international shippers went, and that's still the case today.
Yeah, you've done an enormous amount in your career, and we haven't got time to cover it in this podcast about your work with the TTF, now TDUK, Institute of Carpenters, all sorts of other things.
MDF Association.
But really, I still see you, Geoff, that MDF, to me, I've always said you're Mr. MDF. I mean, it must be, in your mind, a very proud achievement of what you were a part of. I know you'll say you were a part, but you were a big part of this. It was an amazing journey.
Well, that's very kind of you, just to say, there were many, many, many different people involved, but it was a privilege to be part of something as exciting as this. I think being a brand new generic product, it maybe would have been the same for the guys in the early days of plywood or the early days of a particle board. It was about making something happen. Yeah. There was a lot of fun along the way. We did some great marketing campaigns because we needed to actually catch the attention of people. I think that's also perhaps what myself and others that helped with that work are associated with, because we needed to be noticed, because this was all about making something happen, something new. It didn't exist, so we had to make it exist. So the wider point you make about the trade associations, I also felt it was and I still feel it now. I'm currently still president of the Institute of Carpenters, although I'm passing that badge on to somebody else later this year after 10 years in that chair.
Yes.
I think, being part of the bigger picture is really, really important, rather than just taking a very narrow, small view of the commercial position of your own company. I think the bigger picture for the wood industry is really important. And in MDF, it was a good example of how can we use wood resources better. And I think it's great that, here we are today talking about MDF all these years later, and it still absolutely sits in that place along with the whole wood sector, which is actually really relevant today with sustainability and renewables on the agenda of everybody.
We've got to wrap up now, but one last question. I mean, do you think that the sort of technical journey for MDF, if you can be brief, is it finished, or are there going to be new developments, do you think, on the horizon?
I think there will still be new developments. I mean, again, I talked about Medex being the sort of pioneer of the exterior market. Again, working with other technologies. In fact, we partnered with what was a company called Titan Wood at the time, and we used an acetylation process to bring that technology to create a new branded product, Tricoya, which completely moved, let's call it, to a second generation exterior product. That was phenomenal technology, which means basically instead of the MDF absorbing water. It actually didn't absorb water at all and remained absolutely stable. So that sort of technology is out there now. I'd also say, how can you make MDF stronger? You know, you can look at things.
Yes.
What about if you added carbon fibre to the mix? What if you did? You know, you're making tennis rackets out of carbon fibre.
As soon as you say it, it
what if you
seems.
start that? You say, well, hang on, that's the sort of thing you might start to do. So there's loads of stuff out there.
Yeah.
There's still loads out there. So I'd say, you know, that's maybe in a few years' time, there'll be a second reflection of, well, where has it gone since 2026 to the next few years? But I think there's lots more to do.
Good.
I think there's lots of scope, but keeps it interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, happy 50th birthday for MDF as far as we're concerned. And it's a great point. I'm sorry we're going to have to cut it at that, Geoff, but that's a real run through. There's a lot. There's a lot there. Thank you so much for sparing us your time. Really enjoyed the chat.
As you said, you'll probably be back to talk about MDF developments in sort of 3 or 4 years' time.
Yeah. We look forward to it.
But certainly. I mean, it's an interesting milestone. Say it is actually 50 years. So actually, it's a good time. It is a podcast. But actually, we're talking 1976 to
half a century.
Wow. It's actually it's a relevant moment. And,
it is.
You know, to remember people like Ted Bauer and others who played their part, and here we are, still excited about it today as we were in those days. So it's good fun.
Thanks, Geoff.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye. Thanks. Well, that was great. Really interesting.
Fantastic.
Geoff can talk about MDF.
Well, you can see
but it's an exciting journey, I think. Obviously, from you know those early 2 packs to now, you know, a ubiquitous product. Millions of cubic meters capacity worldwide.
136 million.
That's a stack, isn't it? Blimey. Yeah.
You could do one of those things about if you stacked it all up, would it sort of almost reach the moon? Yeah. I mean,
that would cut NASA out of a job.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
But I know Geoff is a very modest man and he won't say it, but he is one of the key people that got that product in there. And I can remember all those years back meeting Geoff and being really impressed by thinking, crikey, this guy's on a mission.
Yeah.
And it gave me the confidence to go out and sell that product.
Yeah.
So I can remember one of my customers who was a Viscount, believe it or not, who made furniture. He didn't make it himself. He had staff who did it for him. But he said to me, you know, we were selling him a lot of MDF by now. And I said, you know, are you happy? He said, do you know what he said? MDF is better than God makes it. And I mean, that's a bit of a statement.
Mighty damn fine.
Yeah, mighty damn fine.
But and it became, you know, on those home improvement programs, it was the go-to product for, you know,
Handy
Andy, the carpenter TV sort of regular.
What a salesman though for MDF.
I know. Yeah. I wonder if he got sponsored.
I don't know. Yeah, he probably got free MDF.
Yeah. But no, fantastic.
Yeah, really enjoyed
podcast.
that.
Excellent.
I just what a story. Well, that's. I think we said at the end, in a few years' time, perhaps we can find out where the new. Think of that. I mean, there's Geoff's already thinking about it, titanium and things embedded in it.
Carbon fibre. Yeah.
When you think about it, that's pretty obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.